Spring 1945. In the forests of Germany, the Allies did not find empty trees. They found aircraft. Fighters sat beneath camouflage nets. Jets waited beside woodland roads. Engines rested in sheds, and half-completed airframes stood among the pines. Some had been deliberately dispersed. Others had landed once and never moved again. When Germany surrendered, the question was no longer simply how many Luftwaffe planes had survived. It was how much of the Air Force was still waiting beyond the runways. Hidden in forests describes several different realities. Some aircraft were deliberately dispersed away from vulnerable airfields. Others were concealed beneath trees or camouflage netting to defeat aerial reconnaissance. Still others belonged to forest factories, where production had been moved away from bombed cities. A final group was never hidden at all. Crash sites, abandoned machines, and unfinished airframes that disappeared beneath branches, mud, and time. Late in the war, a normal airfield had become a dangerous place. Allied reconnaissance aircraft photographed runways, hangars, fuel dumps, and parking areas. Once a German fighter group was identified, bomber or fighter-bomber attacks could arrive within hours. Planes parked wingtip to wingtip were easy targets. A single strike could destroy them before their pilots reached the cockpits. To survive those attacks, Luftwaffe units spread their aircraft across wider areas. Taxi tracks led away from runways toward woods, hedges, farms, and prepared bays. Mechanics could service machines beneath the trees while keeping them far enough apart to reduce the effect of bombing. Pilots still used the runway for takeoff and landing. Between missions, however, the parking area might be hidden beyond the airfield itself. In effect, the woodland became a second airfield. Fuel, tools, radios, spare parts, and mechanics waited beneath the canopy, while pilots used the runway only when necessary. Germany applied the same dispersal principle to its newest aircraft. Jet fighters needed longer runways, specialized maintenance, and fuel supplies that were already difficult to obtain. They were also too valuable to leave in the open. Late war records describe parking areas cut into or positioned beside woods, including dispersal sites associated with Me-262 units. At some improvised autobahn strips, landing surfaces connected directly with concealed parking areas where jets could remain out of sight between missions. Camouflage served another purpose as well, confusing the enemy. German units created dummy airfields populated with wooden and canvas aircraft known as Attrappen. Some were crude, others were detailed enough to resemble fighters from the air. Crews could move them around the edge of a field to imitate normal ground activity, while genuine machines waited elsewhere beneath natural cover. Allied photo interpreters faced a dangerous problem. A shape resembling a Messerschmitt might be a real fighter, a damaged aircraft, or a wooden decoy. The clues were small: tire tracks, shadows, fuel bowsers, maintenance tents, fresh scars on a runway, or the absence of people. A clearing packed with aircraft could be a military base. It could also be a trap designed to make the wrong target look important. Stories about wooden bombs being dropped on wooden German aircraft are difficult to verify in every detail. Some accounts may have grown in the retelling among air crews and civilians. The broader deception method, however, was real. Germany used dummy aircraft and fake installations, while operational planes were pushed toward the edges of woods and covered with branches or nets. Concealment did not need to make a machine invisible. It only had to keep Allied observers uncertain for a few more minutes. Elsewhere, the trees concealed something much larger than a parked fighter. As bombing disrupted aircraft production, German manufacturers moved assembly work away from exposed factories. These sites became known as Waldwerke, forest factories. They were not always underground, and they were not all built to the same design. Some used long woodland roads, temporary sheds, wooden barracks, and dispersed workstations connected by narrow tracks. One of the best-known examples was Kuno I, a Messerschmitt forest complex in the Scheppacher Forst near Burgau and Leipheim in Bavaria. It was used for final assembly of the May 262 jet fighter. Components arrived from other production sites, then wings, fuselages, engines, and tail assemblies were brought together under cover. Completed machines could be moved toward a nearby takeoff strip without passing through a large urban factory that Allied bombers had already learned to recognize. The secrecy of these sites came at a terrible human cost. Forced laborers, including prisoners from the concentration camp system, were used in aircraft production and housed in nearby camps. The woodland concealed machinery, supply routes, and buildings from aerial observers, but it could not conceal the violence imposed on the people who worked there. At Kuno I, completed Me-262s stood among the trees while workers assembled additional machines. Tail sections and unfinished airframes were arranged beside woodland roads, and production equipment was spread across the site. The complex looked less like a conventional factory than a chain of disconnected workshops. That fragmentation was deliberate. Damage to one area did not necessarily stop work elsewhere. For a time, the strategy worked. Allied bombers repeatedly attacked major German factories, but dispersed production was harder to map and harder to destroy completely. Concealment could not solve Germany's larger problems, though. Jets still needed engines, trained pilots, fuel, spare parts, and usable runways. A hidden machine was still something that had to fly. Special missions made the cover of woodland even more valuable. Kampfgeschwader 200 operated unusual operations using captured Allied aircraft and long-range German types. At some of its dispersed locations, runways, command huts, and maintenance areas were kept under cover to reduce the chance of detection by Allied aircraft searching for movement. The unit's secrecy depended not on one perfect hiding place, but on a network of scattered facilities. Captured American bombers formed part of that unusual inventory. Some B-17s were repaired, repainted with German markings, and used for reconnaissance, supply, or clandestine missions. Their crews could sometimes approach Allied formations without immediately revealing the aircraft's true identity. On the ground, however, maintenance teams had to keep unfamiliar systems operating with captured parts and improvised repairs. One captured bomber, known as Phyllis Marie, illustrates that strange second life. The B-17 had fallen into German hands in 1944, was repaired by the Luftwaffe, and was later recaptured intact by American forces at Altenburg on May 4, 1945. Its history crossed the war twice, first as an American bomber, then as a German-operated machine, and finally as evidence of how the Luftwaffe had turned enemy equipment into an operational resource. By early 1945, the dispersed network was beginning to fail. Allied armies were advancing from the west, Soviet forces were moving across the east, and Germany's railway system was breaking apart. Fuel deliveries became irregular. Maintenance crews struggled to obtain replacement parts. Pilots were transferred, killed, or left without enough training to operate the machines waiting in concealed positions. At many sites, concealment no longer served a planned mission. A damaged fighter sat beneath branches. A jet waited beside a woodland track. A transport aircraft was abandoned after its fuel ran out. What had once been a deliberate dispersal system was becoming a collection of stranded machines. That was the scene Allied ground troops encountered as they entered Germany. Beyond the main runways stood scattered aircraft in very different conditions. Some were complete and freshly painted. Others had missing panels, empty fuel tanks, or engines removed to keep another machine flying. A few were prototypes or unfinished airframes that had never been assigned to an operational unit. First soldiers reaching these sites did not always know what they were seeing. A wooded clearing might contain a fighter, a decoy, a workshop, or an entire production line. Aircraft hidden under nets had to be checked carefully. Fuel tanks were drained, weapons unloaded, and documents collected before engineers photographed the machines and local crews could strip them for parts. American teams moved quickly to exploit what they found. Operation LUSTY, the United States effort to capture German aeronautical technology, brought together intelligence teams, engineers, pilots, and transport crews. At Lechfeld near Augsburg, teams associated with Colonel Harold Watson located intact Me-262 jets. The machines were not simply trophies. They could help answer an uncomfortable question. How had Germany built a jet fighter that could outrun most Allied piston-engine aircraft? Captured jets were prepared for evaluation. Some were flown by German test pilots working under Allied supervision. Others were dismantled and shipped to the United States. Engines, instruments, cockpit layouts, armor, radios, and flight manuals were examined separately. A concealed wartime parking area could therefore become the starting point of a journey across the Atlantic. Britain conducted its own recovery effort through Operation Surgeon and related technical missions. British teams searched airfields, factories, woodland sites, and research centers. They wanted not only aircraft, but also access to the engineers who had designed them. A recovered machine could reveal even more through the mechanic who had assembled its engine or the test pilot who had flown it. Soviet teams also entered former German production zones. Aircraft, tooling, blueprints, and technical personnel were gathered from Saxony, Thuringia, Czechoslovakia, and other areas under Moscow's control. Some German designs influenced post-war jet development. Others were shipped east, tested, and eventually dismantled when spare parts or technical support became unavailable. Most aircraft found in woodland sites met a far less dramatic ending. Allied occupation authorities prohibited Germany from retaining military aircraft. Once the most valuable examples had been selected for testing, many remaining machines were marked for disposal. Their concealment no longer protected them. It simply made the work of locating, towing, and dismantling them more complicated. Crews pulled airframes from clearings, dragged them along damaged taxi tracks, or dismantled them beside the trees. Engines often came out first because they contained valuable components. Intelligence teams, or scavengers, removed instruments and radios. Aluminum skin was cut away, wooden sections were burned, and airframes that had once represented the future of aviation became piles of metal beside the same roads where they had been hidden. A number of surviving machines became target hulks. At Allied ranges, captured German fighters and bombers were used for ammunition tests and gunnery training. A Bf-109 or FW-190 could survive the war only to be fired upon by the next generation of weapons. Once a target was damaged beyond use, its remaining structure was scrapped. Remote wrecks followed another path. In isolated woodland, a crashed aircraft could remain buried beneath branches, peat, and soil. Useful parts were sometimes removed by local people. Instruments and panels became prizes for children, while salvage crews searched the wreckage for aluminum. Over time, trees grew through the wreckage, and the machine became part of the landscape rather than a visible military object. That helps explain why some Luftwaffe aircraft seemed to disappear completely after 1945. They had not necessarily been transported to secret warehouses. Many were dismantled where they were found, buried in embankments, burned for scrap, or absorbed into post-war construction. Woodlands preserved a few wrecks, but they also hid the evidence of thousands of aircraft that had already been destroyed. A smaller number received a second life outside Germany. Czechoslovakia assembled the Avia S-199 from German components and design experience. Spain continued developing a modified Bf-109 design as the Hispano Aviación HA-1112. Other countries operated captured or inherited German aircraft for training and transport until spare parts became difficult to obtain. Those machines were no longer symbols of a victorious Luftwaffe. They were temporary solutions for countries rebuilding their air forces. Mechanics kept them running by combining parts from several airframes. A damaged wing from one machine could support another. A serviceable engine might be moved between fuselages. Each year of operation made the original wartime identity less visible. By the middle of the 1950s, most foreign operators had replaced German designs with American, British, French, or Soviet aircraft. The jet age had moved on, leaving wartime fighters too old, expensive, or difficult to maintain. Some went to museums, others were scrapped without records. Former sites followed very different paths, becoming farms, roads, military bases, or nature reserves. Others were abandoned and slowly reclaimed by vegetation. At former German airfields, outlines of taxi tracks and dispersal bays can still survive. Beneath the canopy may remain concrete shelters, fuel stores, foundations, unexploded ordnance, and fragments of aircraft that were never recovered. Occasionally, a wreck returns to history decades later. Divers locate aircraft in lakes. Forestry workers find engines beneath roots. Researchers follow wartime reports to a clearing where a few pieces of aluminum still lie in the soil. Restoration teams may spend years collecting parts from several crash sites to create one complete aircraft for a museum. Even a restored aircraft can carry an incomplete story. Its components may have come from machines that never flew together during the war. The original engine can be missing, while instruments may have been taken from another airframe. What survives is not always one untouched veteran. Sometimes it is a physical reconstruction of a vanished fleet. Ultimately, the story of the Luftwaffe's hidden aircraft is not a single mystery with one final location. It is a chain of different fates. Some planes were concealed to protect them from bombs. Some were built beneath the trees. Some were decoys. Some were captured Allied aircraft wearing German markings. Others were abandoned, scrapped, buried, or forgotten. A few were tested by the Allies and helped shape the next generation of aviation. During those final months, woodland had protected Germany's aircraft from aerial reconnaissance. After 1945, it became evidence of desperate dispersal, secret production, forced labor, technical ambition, and collapse. The same cover that had once offered survival now marked the places where the remnants of a defeated air force could be found. So what happened to the Luftwaffe planes hidden in forests? The most advanced were captured and studied. The most ordinary were stripped and melted down. Damaged machines became targets or disappeared beneath the soil. A small number entered foreign service, and an even smaller number survive in museums today. In the end, the Luftwaffe tried to hide its future among the trees. The forest could delay discovery, complicate bombing, and shelter production. It could not stop the collapse of Germany's fuel, transport, training, and industrial systems. After 1945, those same hiding places became scenes of dismantling, salvage, burial, and gradual forgetting. The trees kept only fragments of what had once been an air force. If you found this story insightful, watch. What happened to the Luftwaffe planes after WW2? Next, for a wider look at how Germany's aircraft were captured, tested, destroyed, and scattered across the world after 1945. Subscribe for more overlooked stories from World War II and its aftermath.